Hi everyone. It's cold, and that means that not only is Rio closed, but I can't leave my house. My car is frozen to my parking space. So what we're going to do for at least tomorrow, and this might also be what we do on Thursday, I'm going to go through the PowerPoint slides, and I'm going to add audio and video. So it's kind of sort of like we're there together. Chapter 3 is pretty long, and so I didn't want to not do this for you guys. Chapter 4 is not as long, but we also might be there on Thursday, so we will see. So without further ado, let's jump into Chapter 3. So Chapter 3 is all about listening, and we are going to identify the stages of the listening process. That's super important to know. We're going to look at the filters, listening filters. How is listening impacted? Strategies that speakers can use to maximize the audience's listening, as well as some strategies that if you're in the audience, what you can do as a listener to better engage with content that the speaker or the public speaker is giving. So, uh, Aristotle, we really haven't talked about him yet, but he was this super smart guy all the way back in the time of Athens. He wasn't just a speaker or an orator, he also was a biologist. Their science was not nearly as advanced as ours, but he was a field biologist to some extent. And he wrote about the importance of creating credibility when talking about um, scientific discoveries, scientific findings, as well as public speaking. He has kind of this triangle of ethos, logos, pathos, and we'll talk a lot more about those throughout the semester. But ethos is essentially your credibility as a speaker. Um, it's you can add credibility to your speeches by including expert opinions, expert knowledge. That's where the oral citations come into play, and we have a whole week to talk about those. But ethos is also uh, your own demeanor, how you carry yourself, how you present yourself, what those visual codes that we were talking about in class. So the listening stage, there's really 5 stages, but memory is always active and it's playing a part on all stages. And we will go through these together. So first, you receive the information. You receive those sounds, those stimuli, and this is happening always. I don't know if it's going to be picked up super loud on my computer. I hope not, but my heat is constantly running. It's been running nonstop for 3 days, and so that is a form of stimuli. Um, if someone walked by and had a conversation outside, that would be a form of stimuli. Um, a car driving by on the road is a form of stimuli. Any sound that is entering your ear holes is a uh, sound that you are receiving in the receiving stage. Obviously, listening doesn't occur until you've kind of made that. If you want to think of the receiving and the comprehending stage as kind of this check or this roadblock that you have to get through before realistic can occur. I'm not paying attention to people outside. I'm not paying attention to my heater. That's kind of just white noise at this point. So I don't have to devote attention to those things that I don't want to devote attention to. And obviously, that can be harder if you have something like ADHD, where if we were in the classroom and someone's giving a speech, but then there's somebody right outside the window having a conversation, it might be harder for you to tune that person out. But so we pick and choose what we give our attention to. And these, how that works, obviously can be impacted by certain health conditions. If you're deaf, right, that would have a big impact on the types of stimuli that you receive. The comprehending stage, this is that second check. So let's say I'm receiving information. There's somebody outside having a conversation. I'm receiving that information, but they're having that conversation in German. Well, I don't speak German. I don't understand German. So at the comprehending stage, that's when I make the decision. Well, I'm not going to keep listening because I don't understand this, what they're saying. That can be a problem even if you speak the language. So let's say I walk into the wrong classroom. I'm now in a physics lecture, and they're saying all their physics-y, sciencey terms, and I don't understand any of that. This isn't. Maybe I'm here just to get a recording for a sick friend who needs notes from class. If I don't understand what they're talking about, I understand the language, they're speaking English, but they're talking about something that I can't even begin to understand, then that's kind of where listening stops for me in that setting. This impacted with frame of reference. So again, if I'm not a big science person, I'm not going to get any of those terms because that's not part of my frame of reference. Or it's not part of my vocabulary also. And we'll talk a little bit later about speaker goals for all of those. The interpreting stage, so we've received the stimuli, we have then we comprehended it, we can comprehend it, we can understand it. So now we are finally applying meaning to the message, trying to figure out exactly what the speaker is trying to say. What is the message? What am I supposed to be getting out of this message? Most seriously, you can encounter problems if words have different meanings, or if we talked about colloquialisms in class, if the speaker is using a lot of those or is using a lot of inside lingo, then that interpreting, you can't accurately interpret the meaning of the message because you don't know exactly what they're trying to say. This can also be a problem if listeners assume that they know what you're talking about. So I don't really have an easy way to do this. I'll write a teeny tiny little graph off to the side here. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, and hopefully this comes up on the recording. If not, you can just look up a graph for the Dunning-Kruger effect. Essentially, it's this concept that says, it's this communicative theory that states the less actual research and exposure you have to a phenomenon, there's a window where you peak, where you think you're at the peak of understanding when in fact you don't actually know anything about that phenomenon. So if t is time, and this bottom line here is knowledge, or sorry, this is knowledge, that's a k, and then this is time, or I'll write an E for exposure to a phenomenon. So this peak here, this is when, let's take electric cars. Yeah, I know what electric cars are. I could certainly have a conversation about them. I know what batteries are. I know how cars work. But then maybe I go to a speech where an electric car engineer is talking, or maybe I rent a book at the library to read, or maybe I watch a documentary on electric cars. And then as my exposure to that phenomenon increases, I realize, oh, I actually don't understand how batteries are made, or how they work, or how you can make wheels on an electric vehicle move without a combustion engine. And then you get to this point at the end where you've kind of plateaued. You've learned a lot about the topic, but you at this peak, you thought at one point, oh, I'm an expert on this thing. So anyway, let me erase all of that. What does that mean for the listening stage? If you are in, someone should be giving a speech on electric vehicles, I think, in one of my classes. Uh, if they were giving that speech and then you, as a listener, you say, well, I already know about electric vehicles, you're going to tune that person out. You're going to be paying less attention to that person, even if they're giving a great speech with information that you've never heard of before, because you assume that you already know about the thing. Uh, then that impacts how you interpret that message. You are not going to ask as many questions because you think you're this expert, um, or paraphrasing. So this is kind of, and this problem comes up in when you do your research and your oral citations, is kind of skimming a speech, if you will, and saying, well, his speech was about this, even though you weren't really paying attention. Um, and there's a super important ability that I think a lot of people lack these days, which is the ability to admit that you weren't paying attention or admit that you don't know what it was about, and instead trying to come up with an answer because you don't want to seem like you don't know the answer to a question. So that's where paraphrasing can come into problems for listeners. And then attribution theory, also a problem for the interpreting stage of listening. And this can be, you can weaponize this as a speaker, but attribution theory essentially it's how we think about terms, things like clean, unclean, good, evil, light, dark. We clump those words together in our minds. So, and then we make assumptions of things because there's other attachments to other words in those kind of bins in our minds. So, if someone's, let's say they're very clean, their clothes are very clean, they smell nice, they talk well, maybe they have fancy clothes or fancy backpack, fancy laptop, uh, then you can kind of make assumptions based on that. And a lot of this is subconscious, or it happens so fast that it's not necessarily, you're not meaning to do these kind of judgments. But maybe that individual, you think, well, they talk nice, they look nice, I'm going to trust that person, or I'm going to believe that their information is more trustworthy. Whereas if someone comes in to give their speech and maybe they're not a dirty person, but maybe their water's out, it's cold, maybe their pipes froze and they couldn't take a shower, so they're wearing, right now I'm wearing a hoodie and a beanie. If I gave a speech wearing a hoodie and a beanie, it might, you might think, oh, he didn't even bother to get up and take a shower before his speech. When in reality, my pipes are frozen. I couldn't take a shower. But because I'm maybe not as clean as I could be, and I'm wearing, cozy house clothes, as I call them, then you start attaching, because of attribution theory, you start attaching other meanings to my speech. Well, if they were dirty and wore, unprofessional clothes, then their message is less trustworthy, or their sources are less trustworthy, or maybe I also am yawning a lot because I had to stay up all night and fix my frozen pipes. So attribution theory on the side of the listener is problematic because you're kind of prejudging the meaning of a message based on external factors. How you can use this to your advantage as a speaker, however, is if you are, you dress professionally, you look professional, you have practiced, so you sound professional. You're not stuttering. Your message is coming across clearly. You don't mess up your oral citations. You look like a duck, you sound like a duck, you act like a duck, you must be a duck. So in the public speaking world, if you look like a competent public speaker, and you sound like a competent public speaker, and you act like a competent, and your visual aids are really pretty and they look great, um, then your audience, because of attribution theory, they will assume, oh, this person's more trustworthy, they're more credible, I can believe what this person's saying. I'm not going to double check their sources, and that kind of thing. So, because of attribution theory, if you're doing all of those, looking nice, sounding nice, acting nice, having good visuals, then the audience is already attaching meaning to that, to the interpretation of that message. And then we get to the evaluating stage, and this is when you've received the stimuli, you can understand and comprehend that stimuli, uh, you know what the person is trying to say, or you've applied meaning to what that person is trying to say. Now you can evaluate that message. So let's think about the electric vehicle example. Someone's giving a speech on electric vehicles, but maybe you don't personally like electric vehicles, or maybe you're not even anywhere near thinking about getting a new car or changing cars. So why should I listen to why is it important to me to listen to this message? Um, that could be impacted by a lot of factors, such as a preconceived attitude towards the speaker. I don't think anyone in the classroom is going to have an issue with like a student getting up and being like, "Oh, well, I know that guy. I don't like that guy. I'm not going to listen to his speech." Um, but you might find yourself in maybe a work environment where maybe there's a mandatory training, but the person that's doing the training, like, you can't stand them, so you don't like that kind of feedback loop of, well, I don't like the person who's doing the training, therefore I don't like training scenarios, therefore I'm not going to ever like training scenarios. And then even if the trainer switches, well, now I've already placed so much emphasis on not liking training situations that now I don't like this person just because we're in this situation. So that we'll get into that problem a little bit more when we get to the persuasive speeches, because when your fellow students have an opinion that's maybe different from yours, when you get to the evaluating stage of listening, uh, you grade that you grade their speech in your mind a little bit more harshly, maybe, especially depending on the words that they chose to use. If they're not dressed appropriately, or they don't look professional or act professional. Um, Maybe it's even a topic that you want to know more about, but the speaker themselves kind of dropped the ball. Maybe they didn't practice at all. Uh, Maybe they showed up late to class and didn't have their notes or didn't have their visual aid ready. So the evaluating stage is kind of looking at all of these factors and then deciding on, can I trust this person? Can I trust this information? Do I want to remember any of this information for later? And then we'll talk a little bit more later about how to counteract some of that. Okay, and then the responding stage, we talked in class about when and where feedback occurs, and I don't want you to get confused that feedback only happens in the responding stage. That happens at any point in the speech. Um, but just for this particular model of the listening, the stages of listening, this would be where the Q&A happens, or where thinking about that back and forth arrow, if the message has been sent to a receiver and now the receiver has an opportunity to send that to send feedback or to send that message back to the speaker, that's where this would happen. But the nonverbal feedback, that can happen at any point during a speech. That can happen before you even start giving your speech. Um, and we'll look at an example of how to more appropriately or accurately respond to feedback. The memory stage impacts all of these things. So the receiving stage, I don't have to waste brain space on listening to my heater. That's what it's always going to sound like. I can tune that out, and that becomes white noise. Um, in the interpreting stage, if I have neighbors that maybe, let's say they speak German, I don't speak German, I can't ever understand what they're saying. I kind of lock that in my memory and say, I don't have to pay attention to neighbors from 2B, they only speak German. Um, and then memory for the, evaluating stage. Also, if it's someone that gave a speech that you didn't like or you disagreed with, or maybe they're just bad at public speaking, then you start attaching those attributions to that speaker. So even if they changed topics or they changed, let's say they gave a really bad informative speech, but then their persuasive speech is actually pretty good. You've already kind of made up your mind. This person is not as trustworthy, so I'm gonna place less value in their speech. The important thing to note from a speaker's perspective is that most of your speech is not going to be remembered at the end of the speech. So if we had any kind of post-speech Q&A or post-speech quizzes, what were their three main points? What were their sub-points? What were their researchers' names? All of that stuff's going to get mind wiped unless it was particularly interesting to the listener. So there is kind of the onus of maintaining interest is on the speaker. But if that helps you kind of alleviate some stress of like, well, what if I mess up? What if I say a name wrong? What if I whatever? Don't worry, your audience is going to kind of mind wipe most of your speech when they leave the room. And we'll look at how to maximize memory retention. Most of it really just comes down to repetition, but we'll talk about that here in a second. So what are some filters? What are some things that can impact listening, specifically the interpreting and evaluating stages? There are a bunch of filters, but the three big major ones are culture, gender, and technology. So when you think, I'll go back a slide for a second. Oop, I can't do that. Okay. When you think about stuff like age is a listening filter, but that's not as impactful as the culture, the gender, and the technology. So what do different cultures value, and how is what they value going to impact listening? So individualistic cultures, that's the USA, that's Australia, Great Britain, other places like that. Individualist cultures place value on the individual and the self. So if you're giving a speech, if you're a listener and you're listening to a speech about electric vehicles, you might be asking yourself, well, how does this save me money? Is it more safe for me? Is it safer for my family? Is it accessible for me? Is it in a price range that I can even approach? Whereas collectivist cultures place value on the group or group rights. So the same exact speech, the listener in a collectivist culture or collectivist mindset would be asking, how does this benefit my community? How does it benefit the ecosystem? Is it, rather than thinking of safety for the driver or safety for the passengers, are these cars safe for pedestrians? So they would be placing different importance, whether or not they're an individualist or a collectivist person. And then speaker to audience, you would want to think, well, am I giving a speech to a group of individualistic individuals or collectivistic individuals? So that would be something to think about. And don't get too bogged down with low context, high context stuff. I'm not going to ask any quiz questions about it. But essentially, the context of the message changes in cultures as well. So in a low context message, mostly from individuals' cultures. The messages are direct, they're clearly spelled out. You, as a speaker, are providing the meaning for the message, and it's very organized and structured. And because we just happen to find ourselves in an individualist culture, that's how most of our speeches are going to end up, are organized, structured. It's on the speaker to get the meaning of the message across, whereas in high context messages, um, the messages are brief, indirect or implicit, and the receivers take the responsibility for figuring out what it is you're even trying to say in your message. So again, you don't have to have this stuff memorized, but it's just important to know that different cultures view messages and attach meaning to messages differently. Culture and time, also important. So monochromatic cultures, individualist cultures usually think of time monochromatic. These are things, what do we value? We value people that are on time. We value speeches that are within the speech window. So that's, high scheduled time versus polychromatic time or polychromatic cultures. It's more about the interaction between the individuals rather than a dependence or a reliance on a fixed schedule. So, for example, in a culture that's monochromatic in terms of time, a doctor's appointment, let's say you have a doctor's appointment 11 to 1 o'clock, or you have 11 to noon is your doctor's appointment. If you don't show up until 11:35, it's a high probability that that doctor or the secretary or whoever has written you off for the evening, and they've already moved on to the next patient who was there on time or did show up on time, because they value maintaining that schedule or keeping to that schedule. Whereas in a polychromatic culture, you are placing value on that connection with the individual. So even though they had an 11 to noon window, they don't care that you were 35 minutes late. They cared that you showed up at all, and they're willing to say, well, they don't have to be here until noon, so I'm going to wait until noon to see if they show up. So that's certainly in America, that's not how our healthcare industry operates. But in a different culture with different relationships with time, that is how they might interact. All right, moving on to gender. This also impacts the meaning of the message, the interpreting, the evaluating of the message. So, for example, women view communication as a cooperative tool. So there's cooperation, there's team building, there's mutual benefit being gained from messages, whereas men view communication more as a competitive tool. So that's something to think about. Women are better at decoding the nonverbal and emotional aspects of a message, whereas men are more apt to recall factual or data or exactly what was said. So women might play around in the pathos to go with that Aristotelian artistic proofs, the ethos, logos, pathos. The pathos is the emotional engagement with the audience, and a woman might be more inclined to engage in those. So, how does this message, how did this speech make me feel? Did they connect with me on an emotional level? Did they connect with me on an individual level? Versus men are more apt to recall, what were the main points? What did that graph say? What did that pie chart include? What was the percentages or the raw data of a speech, and not pay attention or not memorize more of the emotional engagement with your audience. There's also preferences placed differently for men and women. So again, women are more apt to showing preference towards the individuals giving the speeches, and men are more apt to showing preference towards the content uh, of the message. So, we'll look at a pie chart here in a second about the visual vocal codes, um, but this is just saying that that's where men and women are slightly different. Interestingly, men and women they both show a preference in an instructional situations. So that's where we find ourselves right now. So that's why it's sometimes difficult in a classroom to have really good examples for these, because being in the classroom is changing the way that meanings and messages are being sent. As a speaker, you can mitigate some issues with gendered listening by avoiding gendered terms. So things like firefighter instead of fireman, or police officer instead of policeman or policewoman. Um, Thinking about if you're going to talk about sports, I know there's quite a few of my students giving sports betting speeches. Maybe include more than just men's sports in that conversation. There's also an importance to relate that topic to men and women, even if I know my first class is maybe I have 3 female students in that class, so I could see the pitfall of coding your message to be more aimed at men. But let's say that you are giving a speech on fast fashion, or you're giving a speech on the pink tax. I don't think pink tax was an option. It was last semester, but you would want to say just really quickly in the intro, hey, I know you're not, most of you in the audience might not be women, but you all have moms. You might have a sister or a girlfriend or a wife or a daughter. So even though you're not yourself a woman, this topic can be important to you because you more than likely have women in your life that you care about. Uh, same way, if you were giving a speech mostly to women, you could still tie it into, well, I know this issue mostly impacts men, but you probably have a man in your life that you care about. So that's that is relating the importance of the speech to both men and women. That is the responsibility of the speaker. Technology, it's useful and it's problematic. So, we're snowed out right now, right? I can't make it to school. School is closed for today and tomorrow, and probably Wednesday, I would imagine. Um, so this ability for me to record this and send this out to you guys, that's beneficial. But if anybody had a class during COVID, uh, Zoom, Teams meetings, however you ended up doing that, there were issues, right? A lot of a lot of lecture time was wasted because you have to make sure that your sound works and make sure that, so on and so forth. Your camera's working, and all of that. You had to make sure that the invite was sent out properly, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the negative side of technology. Also, your audience, whoever you're sending it to, has to have internet. They have to have a computer. They have to be able to open and interact with that medium. So technology, it can be good, it can also be bad. If you're sending emails or texts, I suppose it would apply to texts too. Watch the tone of the voice. So especially students sending me emails. Um, email isn't really, that's not the time or place to make jokes or to be friendly. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be friendly, but there's like a level of friendly that you don't have to cross when you're giving an email. I don't need smiley faces in my work emails. Let's just put it that way. So tone of voice can be misinterpreted through text. Keeping sentences and paragraphs short. So especially, like I said, students sending me emails all the time, 7, 8 paragraphs of stuff. It's like just, what do you need? What do you want me to do? How can I help you? Keeping your sentences as brief as possible. Mentioning the social ties when appropriate, that's also crucial. So I've got 8 classes, roughly 22-ish students each class. So I'm looking at 120, 130 students. If you just send me an email and say, hey, can I get help with this assignment? I'm struggling a lot. It's like, first off, who are you? What class are you in? What assignment are you talking about? So mentioning those social ties or adding context into your emails, that's important. Apologizing, even if you don't think it's your fault. Sorry to bother you so late. Sorry to send you an email on the weekend. Hey, I'm sorry to ask. I'm sure you get this a lot, but where are the slides on Canvas? So an apology can go a long way if you think it's necessary. And then this thing for receivers preferred sensory channel, that doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to quiz you on it, so let's just skip right over that. So as a speaker, what can you do to motivate your audience during each of the stages of listening? So in the receiving stage, and we'll talk a lot more about attention getting devices, but it's you have to remember that your audience they're thinking about breakfast, they're thinking about their chemistry exam coming up, they're thinking about their boyfriend or girlfriend that they just had a fight with, they're doing other stuff in their mind space. It's up to you as a speaker to kind of pull them out of that and pull them into your speech. And that all happens in the beginning of the speech, in the intro. And again, we'll talk about attention getters later. But then it's also on you to maintain that audience attention. And that a lot of that is through having interesting main points, having interesting topics, having motivations that will keep them interested. So this is a really, really small and hard to read chart for me. But some of the motivation for listeners: how do I reduce stress and anxiety? How do I make more money? Making more money is one of a big motivator for a lot of people. So if you can tie it to how to make money or how to save money, that can be an important motivator. How do I develop self-confidence? How do I try something new and exciting? So keeping in mind that you have to be motivating your audience to pay attention or to be interested in your speech, that's important. How do I maximize at the understanding stage? So we talked about colloquialisms or kind of inside lingo. If you're really into, astrophysics, maybe don't include that language during your speech. Kind of think about if you had to give a speech about electric vehicles to a bunch of fifth graders, you would use different language to match where they're at. Same thing for college. Uh, College students aren't idiots; they're not fifth graders. But if they're not taking chemistry classes, if they're not taking astrophysics classes, when you start using that language, you're going to lose your audience. So making sure that the words, the verbal code, the words you're using in your speech are appropriate for the listeners. Personalizing narratives can also help in the understanding stage. So if you can relate, maybe it's a heavy topic, if you can relate that to something that happened to you, or something that happens to just college students in general or college campuses, or if you can paint a scenario that helps them attach easier to your topic, that can help in the understanding stage. Avoid sending conflicting messages. This is the pie graph I wanted to talk about. And this kind of goes in with that memory where 10 to 25% of your speech is going to be memorized by your audience. Well, it's even less of that is the words that are in the speech. So, um, how an audience interacts with the message, with the delivery of a message, 31% is the verbal code. So again, if you look professional and you sound professional and you act professional and you practiced and you're not making a whole lot of mistakes during your speeches, that is going to come across way more than the actual words that you're using in your speech. So that's important to think about too when you combine that with the memory stage of listening. If they're only memorizing 10 to 25% and they're only paying attention to 31% of your verbal code, then you really have to step your game up for uh, your visual and your vocal codes, because that's how they're going to, when they leave the classroom, that's how they're going to remember your speech. They might not even remember what you talked about a month from now, but they will remember, oh yeah, John Smith, that guy can give some really good speeches. He knows what he's talking about, even though you have no idea what his speech was about. So just keep that in mind. Counteracting resistance to persuasion in the evaluating stage. So that's all about credibility. Um, how do you build that credibility? We'll talk a lot about that later, but it's basically, uh, you know, do you look and sound and act professional, and are you including outside expert information? So you might have an electric vehicle, you might know a lot about electric vehicles, and you can tell your audience that, but it's going to connect more with them if you can tell them that a professional in that field, someone with a PhD or a doctorate degree in that particular subject, is also saying this thing. So, I think electric vehicles are bad for the environment, but don't take it from me. John Smith over at Electric Vehicles org, he also says, blah blah blah. So having that expert opinion does back up your credibility. Um, we'll talk a lot more about oppositional statements for resisting persuasion. So that is, your audience is going to have questions. Their questions are going to come up to them during your speech, especially if it's a topic that they care about. And if you can answer those questions during the speech without having to pause and interact with that individual, that's called a seated oppositional statement. So, let's say you're giving a pro electric vehicle speech, and then someone in the audience is like, well, yeah, sure, they're better on the environment, but what about the lithium mining? That's kind of bad. As a speaker, if you can say, well, some of you in my audience might be thinking about the dangers of lithium mining, or the negative impacts of lithium mining. Well, I'm actually here to explain to you, and then you have some kind of chart or whatever that shows that it's not as bad as they think, or that it's being addressed in other ways. That is a really good, really strong way to counteract resistance to persuasion during the evaluating stage. Um, and then finally, the response stage and reading listener feedback cues accurately. So if we look at this picture here, I'm kind of covering a little bit of it. But this guy in the middle here, he's sleepy, he's yawning, he's rubbing his eyes. Everyone in here looks like a nurse or a doctor or something. So as a speaker, if you see that and you're like, oh man, they think my speech is boring, just remember that they probably don't. There's other stuff going on. I mean, he's got a stethoscope, he's in scrubs, he probably just got off an 18-hour shift, and all he wants to do is climb in bed, cuddle his dog or whatever. Uh, this guy's paying attention, that woman's paying attention. A lot of these people are writing down notes, so they're paying attention. It's just this guy is something else is happening with him. It probably has nothing to do with your speech. Same thing, we talked about in class. If you have a PowerPoint with really tiny text, and everybody in the back row they're leaning in, they're squinting. I can't see the slide. That on your end, that might look like they're disgusted with me. They don't like what I'm talking about at all. In reality, they just can't read the tiny print on your PowerPoint. So, um, looking for the subtle signs of inattention, that is a stronger cue. So if people have hoodies on and they're all slouched back and their hands are in their hoodie pockets, or they're on their phones, that's a good cue. Those kind of things are what you want to look out for if people are not being attentive. And then for the memory stage, we'll talk a lot more about this at a later point, but essentially all of this boils down to repetition. So you're going to tell your audience, so a speech is broken down into three parts: the intro, the body, the conclusion. The intro is when you're going to tell them what you will tell them, and then the body is telling them, and then the conclusion is telling them what you told them. So you already have baked in repetition in the structure of your speech already, but previewing or reviewing main points. So, today we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. You have a preview for that, then you talk about it, and then you wrap it up, and then you move on to the next main point. So there's a lot of repetition or strategies you can implement for repetition. As well as, like I said, with the motivation, if you can tie your main point or the whole topic to something that's going to benefit them individually, if they're locked in, they're interested, they're paying attention, they're taking notes, that will all help aid with memory. So anyway, that's chapter 3. I know that went a little bit long, and then we would have an in-class thing that we will probably, if we have class Thursday, we'll do that Thursday. If not, that's chapter 3. I'm gonna have if it's not up already, I'll put the quiz up on Canvas, and then we'll just play this by ear. If it's as cold as it is, much longer, I can't imagine we'll have class on Thursday. And even if campus is open on Thursday, if my truck is still frozen to the driveway, then there's not much I can do about that. So we will see what happens on Thursday. All right, stay safe out there, stay warm, drink plenty of fluids. Bye.